A mother and her baby vanished without a trace in 1984, leaving their family desperate for answers. But 30 years later, someone discovers the baby's stroller in an abandoned mine, and what they find next makes their blood run cold. In the autumn of 1984, the small town of Pine Creek, Idaho, was shrouded in early morning mist as Sarah Matheson moved about her kitchen with practiced efficiency. At 27, her chestnut hair cut in a practical channel with bangs framed a face marked by subtle exhaustion, though her smile remained warm as she cooed at 6-month-old James, secured in his high chair. The baby gurgled happily, tiny fingers grasping at the spoon she guided toward his mouth, his blue eyes, so like his father's, bright with morning curiosity. Sarah glanced at the clock, 6:15, just as Michael's heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Her husband entered the kitchen with his lunch pail in hand, his flannel shirt already bearing the distinct scent of pine that seemed permanently embedded in the fabric after years at the local sawmill. "Running late," Michael mumbled, planting a quick kiss on her cheek before ruffling James's fine hair. His eyes deliberately avoided the stack of medical bills on the counter, a silent agreement between them to postpone yet another discussion about money. After Michael's departure, Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly. She finished feeding James, dressed him in his blue striped overalls that accentuated his fair complexion, and settled into the quiet rhythm of her morning routine. By 10 o'clock, the baby was down for his nap, and Sarah stepped outside to place several letters in the mailbox. "Morning, Sarah," called Debbie Wilson from across the street, waving cheerfully as she collected her own mail. "You look tired, honey. That little one's still not sleeping through the night?" Sarah nodded, summoning a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know how it is. Just when you think you've got a routine, they change it up on you." What Debbie couldn't see was the bottle of prescription anxiety medication Sarah would retrieve from the bathroom cabinet upon returning inside, hesitating before taking one more pill than the recommended dosage. The orange bottle was already half empty, though it had been refilled just 3 days ago. The temporary relief from the crushing weight on her chest was worth the guilt she felt about exceeding the doctor's instructions. At 2:30 that afternoon, Sarah wrote a note in her delicate handwriting and left it on the kitchen counter. "Levying James for our park walk. We'll be back before dinner. Love you." She carefully placed the diaper bag over her shoulder, secured James in his navy blue stroller, a gift from her parents when he was born, and stepped out into the crisp September air. Michael returned at 6:47, immediately sensing the unusual silence, no dinner simmering on the stove, no gentle lullaby humming from the nursery. He called out Sarah's name, his voice echoing through the empty rooms before his eyes fell on the note in the kitchen. Initially unconcerned, he checked the refrigerator for James's evening bottle, frowning when he didn't find the prepared formula that was part of their nightly routine. By 7:25, after calling Sarah's parents in Portland, who hadn't heard from their daughter, Michael's unease deepened. He called 3 of Sarah's friends, none of whom had seen her. With growing apprehension, he noticed Sarah's purse still sitting on the coffee table, wallet and ID untouched inside. In the bathroom, Michael counted the pills in Sarah's prescription bottle, his heartbeat accelerating when he realized more were missing than should be after normal use. At 10:03, he finally called the Pine Creek Police Department. Officer Dave Brennan arrived 17 minutes later, his familiar face from Sunday church meetings offering little comfort as he casually filled out the initial report. "I'm sure she's just lost track of time at someone's house," he assured Michael, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of professional concern when told about the medication and the purse left behind. The following morning, with still no sign of Sarah and James, a formal search began at 8 o'clock. Volunteers from throughout Pine Creek gathered at the municipal park entrance, where Sheriff Bill Morrison distributed maps and instructions, while Michael, who hadn't slept all night, clutched a recent photograph of his wife and son. As the morning progressed with no results, Michael's desperation mounted. The crisp autumn air that had seemed so ordinary yesterday now felt ominous, the rustling leaves mocking his growing panic. At 11:30, a shout from the eastern section of the park sent everyone running. "Found something," called a volunteer, pointing toward the ground near a cluster of pine trees, 200 yards from the park entrance. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs as he pushed through the crowd. There, partially covered by fallen leaves, lay a small teddy bear he instantly recognized. James's favorite toy, the one that accompanied them on every outing. The sight of it, abandoned and alone, unleashed the terror he'd been fighting to contain. While the officers were cordoning off the area around the teddy bear, a pharmacy clerk approached Sheriff Morrison and whispered something that made him immediately look toward Michael. "I saw Sarah yesterday afternoon, but she wasn't heading to the park. She was going toward the state highway, and she looked determined." Elaine Dumont nervously twisted a strand of graying hair around her finger as she recounted what she had seen to Sheriff Morrison. "I'm certain it was Sarah. She passed by the pharmacy around 3 o'clock, pushing the stroller toward the highway, not the park. She seemed focused, determined somehow, not distressed, just resolute." Morrison's gaze shifted from the pharmacy technician to Michael, whose face had drained of color at this revelation. What had seemed like a possible abduction now carried troubling new implications. Within hours, the investigation's tone shifted dramatically. Sheriff Morrison and Detective Frank Cooper ushered Michael into a small room at the station, photographs of Sarah and James spread across the table between them. "Let's go through your movements again," Cooper said, his voice deliberately even. "You left for work at what time exactly?" Michael rubbed his eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "I've told you 3 times already. I was at the sawmill all day. Ask my supervisor. Ask anyone there. I clocked in at 6:30 and didn't leave until 6. Cooper nodded, making another note in his already full pad. "And when was the last time you and Sarah argued?" The question hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Everyone has disagreements," Michael stammered, his discomfort palpable. Later that afternoon, Cooper examined the Mathesons' bank statements, methodically circling past due notices and collection warnings in red marker. When Michael returned from a brief break, his face flushed with shame seeing their financial struggles laid bare on the detective's desk. "Looks like you've been under considerable financial pressure," Cooper observed, tapping his pen against a particularly large medical bill. "That must create tension at home." In his notepad, Cooper had already written, "Financial problems, frequent arguments according to neighbors, husband with history of alcohol consumption." Outside the station, a team with tracking dogs worked the perimeter of the forest. The animals followed a scent trail determinedly until reaching a bus stop on the state highway, where they circled in confusion, losing the trail entirely. That night, alone in James's nursery, Michael finally allowed his composure to crumble. Clutching one of his son's tiny shirts to his chest, he wept silently, the weight of suspicion and loss crushing him simultaneously. The following morning, FBI agent Ronald Davis arrived at the Pine Creek station, his skeptical expression evident as he quickly scanned the preliminary report. "Without concrete evidence of federal crime, our involvement will be limited. We can assist, but primary jurisdiction remains local." Throughout the next several days, volunteers distributed flyers with photos of Sarah and James at gas stations and restaurants along the highway. Michael noticed how some averted their eyes when he approached, their suspicion palpable in the small community where rumors traveled faster than facts. At the local diner, an elderly woman pulled Sheriff Morrison aside. "I saw that young mother getting into a dark car with a man. The baby was sleeping in the stroller," she insisted, adding another conflicting account to the growing pile of witness statements. Meanwhile, at the truck stop just outside town, a driver contradicted this completely. "No, she was alone when she boarded the 4:30 bus, I'm certain. No baby, just a small travel bag." Back at the station, Michael stared at the wall map dotted with pins marking contradictory sightings, his frustration mounting visibly as the investigation seemed to move in circles. The forensic technician examining James's recovered teddy bear found no unexpected fingerprints or conclusive evidence that might point to what had happened. After another day of fruitless searching, Michael found himself at the local bar, ordering whiskey after months of sobriety. The bartender's judgmental gaze followed him to a corner table, where he hunched over his drink, unaware that his actions were being noted and would later become part of the town's growing narrative about him. The next morning, his head pounding with hangover, Michael confronted Morrison outside the station. "You're wasting time investigating me while my family is out there somewhere." His raised voice attracted stares from passers-by, each witness adding to the town's evolving opinion. As Michael staggered home after drinking excessively, he found Sarah's parents, Eleanor and Robert Davis, standing at his doorstep with stern expressions, and in Eleanor's hands, a pink diary he had never seen before, with Sarah's handwriting on the cover, "Thoughts I cannot share." Eleanor's grip tightened around the pink diary as she studied Michael's disheveled appearance. "We found this while clearing out her old room in Portland," she said, her voice carrying years of pain. "Perhaps it will help us understand what happened." Robert Davis stood rigidly beside his wife, his academic posture betraying his background as a retired university professor. At 62, his face showed the weathered lines of a man who had aged a decade in the weeks since his daughter's disappearance. The following morning, Michael sat at the kitchen table in the weak dawn light, his trembling hands turning the diary's pages. Each entry revealed thoughts Sarah had never voiced aloud. "Sometimes I look at Michael when he drinks and don't recognize the man I married," one passage read. "I'm afraid James will grow up seeing his father like this." He closed the book, shame burning through him as he confronted the truth of his wife's silent suffering. Meanwhile, Eleanor methodically organized James's nursery, her movements precise as she discovered a shoebox hidden beneath the crib. Inside lay a meticulous record of medical appointments and expenses that Sarah had concealed from everyone. Later that afternoon, Robert confronted Michael in the garage, holding up empty whiskey bottles he'd found behind a stack of storage boxes. "Did you drink the day she disappeared? Is that what you're hiding from the police?" he demanded, voice trembling with barely controlled rage. Michael's denials fell on deaf ears as the rift between him and his in-laws deepened daily. While he slept fitfully on the couch, Eleanor secretly checked the phone records, carefully noting unfamiliar numbers in her notebook, building her own investigation independent of the increasingly skeptical police. 2 weeks after the disappearance, a press conference outside the station drew reporters from regional outlets. A KTVB journalist from Boise delivered his report with practiced gravity. The disappearance of the young mother and her baby enters its second week without conclusive clues, while sources close to the investigation indicate family tension. Michael hurled a glass against the wall when the reporter mentioned the husband, the primary person of interest in the case, the shattering sound mirroring his fragmenting life. At the station, Eleanor and Detective Cooper carefully reviewed Sarah's diary, with Cooper highlighting an entry that troubled him. "I can't stand the sleepless nights anymore. The medication is the only thing that helps me shut down for a few hours." While Michael sought comfort from the local pastor in his struggle to maintain sobriety, Robert transformed the dining room into an impromptu command center, pinning photos of Sarah and James on a corkboard, determined to maintain momentum in a search that was losing official interest. 1 month after the disappearance, Bill Jensen, a clerk at the Spokane bus station, showed an FBI agent a ticket to Vancouver purchased on September 18th. "I'm certain it was her. Shoulder-length brown hair, looked tired. She was alone," he insisted, providing the first tangible lead in weeks. U.S. Border Patrol agents reviewed security footage from the Canadian entry point, but found no one matching Sarah's description legally crossing the border that day or the following week. That evening, Eleanor wept silently in James's room, clutching a tiny baby shoe, when the sound of Michael breaking something in the living room during another angry outburst startled her. Their grief manifested in opposing ways, her quiet desperation against his volatile rage. "You just want me to be guilty," Michael shouted during a heated argument with Robert about the investigation's direction. Robert's face reddened as he countered, "What did you do to my daughter?" The next morning, tension in the house reached its peak when Sheriff Morrison arrived with a search warrant and a grave expression. "We received an anonymous call claiming blood was cleaned from your car trunk, Mr. Matheson, and we need to verify that immediately." Forensic technicians in white coveralls meticulously examined Michael's car in the garage, spraying luminol and scanning with ultraviolet light, while neighbors discreetly watched through windows. The procedure lasted 3 hours, yielding results that contradicted the anonymous tip. The search revealed no evidence supporting the anonymous allegation, Sheriff Morrison announced at an impromptu press conference on the Mathesons' front lawn. "We continue investigating all leads in this case." The damage to Michael's reputation, however, was already cemented. Later that afternoon, he entered the local diner, immediately noticing how customers shifted uncomfortably, some deliberately changing tables. The waitress placed his coffee with hurried movements, avoiding eye contact and neglecting her usual, "Need anything else?" Detective Cooper traced the anonymous call to Frank Peterson, a neighbor who had previously argued with Michael about property boundaries. When confronted, Peterson admitted fabricating the accusation out of lingering resentment, earning himself a citation for filing a false report. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Robert Davis signed a lease for a small apartment 3 blocks from the Matheson house, the landlord eyeing them warily. "You sure you want to get involved in this situation?" he asked, hesitating before handing them the keys. 2 months after Sarah's disappearance, Michael sat alone in his kitchen, reading the demotion letter from the sawmill. Due to continued absenteeism and decreased productivity. He crumpled the paper in his fist, another piece of his disintegrating life falling away. That evening, Michael drove 30 miles to a bar where no one recognized him. He drank alone, staring at the worn photograph of Sarah and James in his wallet, the edges frayed from constant handling. In their rented apartment, Eleanor methodically organized boxes of Sarah's belongings shipped from Portland. She discovered teenage letters and earlier diaries, seeking patterns or clues in her daughter's past that might explain her disappearance. One diary entry from Sarah's 16th year caught Eleanor's attention. "Sometimes I feel I could just disappear and nobody would notice. It's like I'm already a ghost." The words sent a chill through Eleanor, suggesting a pattern of escapist thinking long before Sarah became a wife and mother. The following weekend, Eleanor sat on a park bench, thoughtfully watching children play where Sarah once brought James. Michael stumbled past, clearly intoxicated at midday, not even noticing his mother-in-law as he weaved toward his increasingly neglected home. By September 1985, marking 1 year since the disappearance, Pine Creek's local church hosted a meeting to organize a remembrance vigil. The pastor diplomatically mediated tensions between Michael and community members who objected to his participation, citing his deteriorating reputation. Regional newspapers sent reporters to interview locals, their stories reflecting the town's divided opinions. National media outlets had long since moved on to fresher tragedies, leaving the Matheson case to fade from public consciousness. On the anniversary evening, candlelight illuminated the municipal park as photographs of Sarah and James decorated an improvised altar. Michael, surprisingly sober and composed, stood at the edge of the gathering, separated from the community by an invisible wall of suspicion. When invited to speak, Michael approached the makeshift podium with hesitant steps. "Please, if anyone knows anything," he said, his voice breaking with raw emotion, "I just want to know what happened to my family." The sincerity in his plea made even some longtime skeptics momentarily question their assumptions. As the vigil dispersed, a dark-haired woman in her 40s approached Eleanor, her features obscured by oversized sunglasses despite the evening darkness. She leaned close, whispering something that transformed Eleanor's expression from grief to shock. Eleanor Davis trembled as she watched the stranger quickly blend into the departing crowd and disappear. The words still echoing in her ears. "Your daughter is alive. I saw her in Canada 3 months ago, but she doesn't want to be found, especially by him." And in her hand, a small paper with a scrawled name. Ellen Reynolds. Eleanor clutched the paper bearing the name Ellen Reynolds, as she hurried back to her apartment, her mind racing with possibilities. Under the dim light of her bedside lamp, she examined the hastily scrawled words, deliberating whether to share this revelation with anyone. After hours of internal debate, she decided to keep the information to herself, at least temporarily. The following morning, Robert discovered Eleanor making secretive phone calls, her voice hushed and her notepad quickly concealed when he entered the room. "What are you hiding?" He confronted her, blocking the doorway. "I thought we were in this together." Eleanor's resistance crumbled under her husband's unwavering gaze. She produced the note, explaining the encounter at the vigil. "And if it's true," she whispered, "if she ran away deliberately, we can't tell Michael, not in his current state." 2 days later, the Davis couple sat in a modest office in downtown Boise, facing Jake Mercer, a private investigator with salt and pepper hair and perpetually skeptical eyes. "Canada is a large territory to search for someone who doesn't want to be found," he warned, reviewing the sparse information they provided. While Eleanor and Robert pursued this tenuous lead, Michael's life continued its downward spiral. On a gray October morning, he stood silently as a court officer supervised his eviction, watching neighbors peek through curtains as he loaded a few possessions into his pickup truck, all that remained from the life he once had. That evening, Michael hung the single-family photograph he'd kept, Sarah holding newborn James, on the peeling wall of a dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of town, his new home a physical manifestation of his fallen status. At the Pine Creek Sheriff's Department, newly appointed Sheriff Thomas Reed, 34 and ambitious, briefly reviewed the Matheson file before relegating it to a drawer of inactive cases. "Keep the file open, but don't dedicate any more active resources," he instructed his deputies, eager to focus on more solvable crimes. 3 weeks later, Jake Mercer stood in a public library in Vancouver, showing Sarah's photograph to an elderly librarian with trifocal glasses. "Yes, she worked here for several months as Ellen Reynolds," the woman confirmed. "Very quiet, kept to herself. Left about 3 years ago, said she was moving to Edmonton." Mercer discovered an employment application form with Ellen Reynolds' photo attached, undeniably Sarah, though with shorter, darker hair and missing her characteristic smile. The discovery electrified the Davis couple, who immediately arranged travel to Edmonton. After exhausting days checking rental records throughout the city, Robert and Eleanor finally located an apartment where Ellen had lived, only to learn she had vacated the premises 8 months earlier, leaving no forwarding address. Back in Pine Creek, Michael sat alone in his trailer, drunkenly watching a national television program called America's Missing that featured Sarah and James's case. The segment included computer-generated images showing how James might look at age 5, the familiar yet altered features of his son sending Michael into another drinking binge. Following the broadcast, the Pine Creek Sheriff's Department phones rang incessantly. Volunteers diligently recorded information from possible sightings across multiple states, most obviously inaccurate or fabricated. Detective Cooper, now older and visibly weary, organized the new leads on a large map, placing color-coded pins that created a chaotic pattern across the United States and Canada, representing the scattered contradictory reports. In early November, Mercer met secretly with Eleanor and Robert at a cafe 30 miles outside Pine Creek. "She's deliberately covering her tracks," he concluded. "This isn't the behavior of a kidnapping victim." That evening, Eleanor pored over old family albums, finding a teenage photo of Sarah with short dark hair, realizing how easily her daughter could have transformed her appearance to become someone else entirely. Later that night, as Eleanor struggled with the possibility that her daughter had deliberately abandoned her life, the telephone rang. It was Mercer, his voice tense with excitement. "I found something. A child named Jamie Reynolds was enrolled in a primary school in Calgary last year. And guess who's listed as the mother? Ellen Reynolds, born on the same date as Sarah." Eleanor and Robert sat at their small kitchen table, documents spread before them like puzzle pieces of their daughter's secret life. The school enrollment form for Jamie Reynolds bore a birth date matching James Matheson's exactly, confirming what they already suspected in their hearts. "If this really is Sarah," Robert said, running his fingers through thinning gray hair, "she committed a crime by disappearing with James. But what if she had valid reasons we don't know about?" Eleanor traced the outline of Jamie's name on the class list from Maple Creek Elementary School in Calgary, a red circle highlighting Jamie Reynolds, 3rd grade, among the roster of children. Her grandson, a boy she had mourned as possibly dead, was alive, growing up, learning, existing in a world parallel to their grief. While the Davises grappled with their moral dilemma, Michael Matheson sat stiffly on a folding chair in the basement of Pine Creek Methodist Church, attending his first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. "I'm here because I've lost everything," he admitted to the circle of strangers, his voice hoarse from years of drinking. "My family, my home, my job. I have nothing left to lose." 3 days later, Eleanor and Robert boarded a flight to Calgary, Robert clutching James's teddy bear, returned by police after forensic examination, as if it were a talisman that might somehow lead them to the child who once loved it. The weight of their secret mission pressed heavily on them during the journey north. The following afternoon found them in a rental car parked discreetly across from Maple Creek Elementary, nervously watching as children streamed out of the building at dismissal time. Eleanor's breath caught sharply as a brown-haired boy emerged with a group of friends, his features unmistakable even at a distance. "It's him, Bob," she whispered, clutching her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. "It's our grandson. Look at him. He's identical to Michael when he was young." The boy's blue eyes and the distinctive way he tilted his head when listening to a friend were pure Michael, genetic echoes impossible to disguise. Robert discreetly photographed Jamie with a telephoto lens as the boy waited in the school bus line, completely unaware of being observed by the grandparents he didn't know he had. The simple act of watching him, alive, healthy, normal, brought tears to their eyes after years of imagining worst-case scenarios. Following the address listed in the school records, they located a modest, well-kept home in a middle-class neighborhood, complete with a child's bicycle propped against the front porch. As they sat in their car contemplating their next move, a woman approximately 40 years old approached from behind, startling them with words that confirmed their discovery. "I knew you would eventually find me." Though her hair was shorter with premature gray streaks, there was no mistaking Sarah Matheson in the face of the woman now calling herself Ellen Reynolds. The three moved to a quiet cafe several blocks away, untouched coffee cups between them, as they struggled through the most difficult conversation of their lives. "I couldn't continue that life," Sarah explained, her voice low and controlled. "Michael was sinking deeper into alcoholism. We were drowning in debt. And I couldn't breathe." Her posture remained defensive, her eyes constantly checking the door as if planning escape routes. Eleanor's hands trembled as she asked the question that had haunted her for years. Why the teddy bear in the forest? Why make us believe something terrible had happened? Sarah gripped her coffee cup with white knuckles, finally meeting her mother's gaze directly. "Jamie is happy and healthy. He has friends, does well in school, has never known the fear I felt every day. I'm not going back to Pine Creek, no matter what you say." As Sarah stood to leave, Eleanor grasped her wrist and spoke the words Sarah most feared hearing. "Michael is sober now, Sarah, for almost 6 months. He never gave up looking for you, and legally he has the right to know his son is alive." Sarah's complexion paled at Eleanor's words, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "You don't understand what's at stake. Jamie doesn't know any other reality. This would destroy him." In the cafe parking lot, mother and daughter exchanged phone numbers, an act that felt surreal after years of deliberate disconnection. "Tomorrow, at my house at 10. Jamie will be at school," Sarah said, her voice barely audible above the passing traffic. "I promise I'll be there. I won't run again." Back at their hotel room, Eleanor and Robert engaged in the most heated argument of their 40-year marriage. Robert paced between the beds, his academic demeanor giving way to raw emotion. "We have a legal obligation here, Ellie. he insisted, gesturing emphatically. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the photograph of Jamie they'd taken earlier. What if she had valid reasons? What if Jamie is better here? She countered, her voice breaking. Look at him, Bob. He has a good, stable life. In Pine Creek, Michael Matheson stood in the parish hall of St. Andrew's Church, accepting a 6-month sobriety medallion from his AA sponsor. The small group applauded as Michael spoke softly. Today I'm sober for myself, but I started this journey for them, even without knowing if they're still alive. The following morning in Calgary, Eleanor and Robert stood nervously at Sarah's front door, taking in the quiet middle-class neighborhood before ringing the bell. Christmas wreaths hung on several doors despite it being only November, a reminder of how normal life continued here, while their world had remained frozen in September 1984. Sarah welcomed them into a cozy living room adorned with photographs documenting Jamie's childhood, soccer teams, school portraits, Halloween costumes, a visual timeline of all they had missed. The domesticity of the scene made the reality of Sarah's deception even more jarring. From a closet, Sarah retrieved a shoebox containing detailed journals and old medical receipts. I want you to understand why I felt I had no choice, she said, placing the box on the coffee table between them. She opened a leather-bound journal to a dog-eared page, showing Eleanor an entry dated July 1984. He threw a bottle against the wall just feet from where James was sleeping. When I begged him to stop drinking, he said I was crazy, that I was exaggerating. Robert examined copies of medical bills and debt notices, the gravity of the Mathesons' financial situation far worse than they had imagined. The mounting evidence of their daughter's desperate circumstances challenged their moral certainty. I spent weeks preparing everything, Sarah explained, her voice detached as if describing someone else's life. The bear in the forest, the stroller in the abandoned mine. I wanted them to seem like clues to something terrible, so the search would eventually end. Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes. Do you have any idea what this did to your father? He died still believing you and James were dead somewhere. Sarah's expression softened momentarily before she reached for a folder containing employment records, home purchase documents, and Jamie's college savings account statements. I've built a stable life for us here, she said with quiet defiance. The front door opened unexpectedly, and Jamie entered with his school backpack. Mom? The school nurse sent me home. I have a headache. A tense silence fell as Jamie noticed the strangers, his eyes, identical to Michael's, widening with curiosity. Sarah quickly improvised. Jamie, these are old friends of mine who were passing through town. After Jamie went upstairs to rest, Sarah faced her parents with renewed determination. You have 48 hours to decide what you're going to do. If you tell Michael or the authorities, Jamie and I will disappear again. And this time I'll make sure you never find us. Pressured by Sarah's ultimatum, Eleanor and Robert returned to their hotel room, the weight of their moral dilemma hanging between them like a physical presence. In the small confines of the room, Robert resumed his agitated pacing, legal and ethical considerations tumbling from his lips in an unending stream. She's emotionally blackmailing us, Robert exclaimed, running both hands through his thinning hair. We can't be complicit in this, Ellie. There are laws about parental rights. Eleanor sat motionless on the edge of the bed, studying the photograph of Jamie they had managed to capture. The boy's features, so reminiscent of both Sarah and Michael, stared back at her, oblivious to the turmoil surrounding his existence. Look at him, Bob, she said softly. He has a good life, stability, routine. What right do we have to destroy that? Back in Pine Creek, Michael was experiencing his first taste of stability in years. The morning light filtered through the trailer's small windows as he carefully measured and cut a new shelf for the wall, his movements precise and unhurried. A small potted plant sat on the windowsill, a gift from his AA sponsor marking 6 months of sobriety. Later that afternoon, Michael entered the Pine Creek employment office, his appearance noticeably improved from previous visits. The wrinkled application for a janitorial position at the local elementary school trembled slightly in his hands, but his eyes showed determination as he submitted it to the receptionist. At the Pine Creek Cemetery, Michael knelt before Robert Davis's simple headstone, the autumn leaves crunching beneath his knees. "I'm trying to be the man your daughter deserved," he whispered to the granite marker, "even if it's too late." In their Calgary hotel, Eleanor and Robert developed an alternative approach over breakfast. "What if we propose a gradual reintroduction?" Eleanor suggested, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "No courts, no authorities, just reconnecting the family on controlled terms." On her lawn in Calgary, Sarah watched Jamie play with neighborhood friends, autumn sunlight illuminating his animated gestures as he explained the rules of their improvised game. Her face revealed the internal conflict between protecting the life she had carefully constructed and confronting the moral implications of her deception. The following day, the Davises presented their proposal to Sarah at the public library where she worked. "First, tell Jamie the truth," Eleanor explained gently. "Then, perhaps letters or phone calls with Michael, under your supervision." Sarah's hesitation was palpable as she shelved books with practiced efficiency. "How can I know he's really changed? That it's not just a phase of sobriety that will collapse when things get difficult?" Eleanor reached into her purse, producing recent photographs of Michael she had kept. "See for yourself, this is Michael now. Sober, working, rebuilding his life." At the Calgary airport 2 days later, Sarah embraced her parents tensely. 2 weeks, she said, her voice barely audible over the terminal announcements. "Give me 2 weeks to think and maybe prepare Jamie for the truth." When the Davises returned to Pine Creek, they were struck by how little the town had changed physically, though the Matheson case seemed to have faded from community consciousness. The following morning, Eleanor visited the elementary school on a pretext and was startled to see Michael in a janitor's uniform, interacting warmly with children in the hallway. After his shift, Michael invited Eleanor for coffee at the diner that had once shunned him. "I know you must find it strange seeing me like this, after everything," he said, stirring his coffee. "But I'm really trying to rebuild my life." That night, Eleanor spoke with Sarah by phone from her apartment. "He's truly changed, Sarah. It's not an act. He's rebuilt his life from the ashes." The same evening, as Sarah contemplated the difficult conversation she would need to have with her son, Michael received an anonymous letter that would shatter his newly stable world once again. Inside the plain envelope, a recent photograph of an 8-year-old boy unmistakably resembling him, with the name Jamie Reynolds written on the back. Michael's hands trembled as he stared at the photograph, turning it over repeatedly to see the name Jamie Reynolds written in unfamiliar handwriting. The boy's features were unmistakable, the same eyes that looked back at Michael from his own childhood photos, the same slight tilt of the head. His heart hammered against his ribs as possibilities he'd never dared consider crashed through his mind. Without changing from his work clothes, Michael drove directly to Eleanor's apartment, pounding urgently on her door despite the late hour. When she opened it, he thrust the photograph toward her. "What is this? Where did it come from? Do you know something about this?" The questions tumbled out in a desperate rush. Eleanor's face drained of color as she recognized the photo, the same angle from which Robert had captured Jamie's image outside the school. She stepped back, inviting Michael inside with a defeated gesture. "We found her, Michael," Eleanor confessed, sinking into her worn armchair. "Sarah is alive in Calgary, and James, he's with her. He's your son." Michael's legs gave way as he collapsed onto the sofa, shock transforming into anger. "You knew? How long? How could you keep this from me?" His voice rose as he knocked over a coffee cup, barely noticing the liquid seeping into the carpet. "She threatened to disappear again if we told anyone," Eleanor explained, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "We were trying to protect your chance of eventually meeting him." Michael stared at the photograph again, tears finally breaking through his shock. "He has my eyes," he whispered. "All these years, he was alive this whole time." In Calgary, Sarah sat on the edge of Jamie's bed, watching him sleep for several minutes before gently waking him. Her heart raced as she prepared to shatter the foundations of his world. "I have something very important to tell you," she began, her voice barely steady. And it's going to be difficult to understand. Jamie rubbed sleep from his eyes, instantly alert at his mother's serious tone. His confusion deepened as Sarah explained that his real name was James Matheson, that they had left a town called Pine Creek when he was a baby because things weren't good between her and his father. "You lied to me about everything?" Jamie's initial disbelief transformed into anger as understanding dawned. "My dad didn't die?" Sarah pulled a worn photograph from her pocket, one she'd kept hidden for years in a locked box. "This is your father, Michael. He had problems back then, but I've heard he's changed a lot." Back in Pine Creek, Michael and Eleanor sat at the kitchen table strategizing their approach. Through the night, Michael drafted and redrafted a letter to Sarah, fighting to keep his writing steady. "I need to be honest about my mistakes," he said, crumpling another attempt, "but I don't want to scare her or make her run again." The finished letter was simple but heartfelt. "Sarah, I'm not here to judge or accuse. The years have taught me that we all make mistakes. I only want the chance to know my son, on your terms." When the letter arrived in Calgary, Sarah sat on her front porch steps, reading and rereading each word. The handwriting was steadier than she remembered, another small evidence of change. That evening, Sarah and Jamie sat in their living room, the atmosphere heavy with new realities. "The grandparents you met last week, they really are your grandparents. And your father wants to meet you, but only if you want to." Several anxious days passed before Sarah made her decision. A supervised meeting was arranged in neutral territory, a park in Spokane, Washington, where Michael could see Jamie without revealing his identity yet. In Pine Creek, Michael nervously selected a simple, age-appropriate gift, a small model airplane kit. "He's 8 years old. Do 8-year-old boys still like these things?" he asked the store clerk, his voice betraying his uncertainty. On the appointed day, Michael arrived at the Spokane Park 2 hours early, his heart threatening to burst from his chest each time he spotted a dark-haired child in the distance, until he finally saw Eleanor walking along a wooded path beside Sarah, older, different but unmistakable, and between them, holding their hands reluctantly, the boy from the photograph. Michael stood frozen in place, watching as Sarah approached with their son. The boy's curious gaze met his, and Michael felt a physical ache in his chest, 8 years of absence condensed into a single moment. Eleanor made the awkward introduction. "Jamie, this is Michael, an old family friend from Pine Creek." Michael extended his hand, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Hello, Jamie. It's very nice to meet you." Jamie tilted his head slightly, a gesture so reminiscent of Michael that Eleanor had to look away. "You knew my mom when she was young? What was she like?" he asked, his intuition sensing something deeper beneath the surface. Michael fumbled with the package in his hands, grateful for the distraction. "I thought you might like this," he said, offering the model airplane kit. "I used to build these when I was about your age." Jamie's face brightened immediately. "I like planes too. I have a book about aviation history. My teacher says I know more about World War II aircraft than most adults." From a nearby bench, Sarah watched the interaction with conflicted emotions. She had prepared herself for awkwardness, for Jamie's possible rejection of this stranger, but not for the immediate and natural connection forming between father and son. "They tilt their heads exactly the same way when they're concentrating," Eleanor whispered, discreetly capturing a photo as Michael and Jamie sat at a picnic table examining the model kit instructions. 2 hours passed with remarkable ease. When it was time to leave, Michael offered his hand again. "Hey, it was really good to meet you, Jamie. I hope we can do this again sometime." Jamie nodded, surprisingly enthusiastic. "Next time I can show you my collection of model planes." As Jamie explored a nearby playground with Eleanor, Sarah and Michael stood in uncomfortable silence before she finally spoke. "He's so much like you, not just physically. The way he thinks, how he solves problems. I see you in him every day." "Thank you for this," Michael responded, his voice thick with emotion. "I know how difficult this must be for you." Over the following months, these meetings became regular occurrences, first in Spokane, then occasionally in Calgary, under Sarah's careful supervision. Michael and Jamie played chess in quiet cafes, built increasingly complex models, and visited science museums together, their relationship deepening with each encounter. On a crisp autumn day, Jamie stood in his bedroom in Calgary, studying his reflection in the mirror, then glancing at a photograph of Michael that Eleanor had given him. The similarities were undeniable. The same blue eyes, the same slight dimple when they smiled. That evening, he confronted Sarah in the kitchen. "He's my father, isn't he? Michael is my real father. Why didn't you tell me the whole truth?" Sarah set down the dish she was washing, preparing for the conversation she had been rehearsing for weeks. "Yes, he is your father. I was afraid to tell you everything at once. Afraid of how you'd react. Afraid of losing you." In an Idaho courtroom 6 months later, Sarah stood dignified as the judge delivered her reduced sentence, probation and community service, considering the extraordinary circumstances. "I acknowledge my actions and accept responsibility for the years of pain I caused," she stated formally. 1 year after their first meeting, Jamie visited Pine Creek for the first time. He stood silently before the small house where he had spent his first 6 months, walked through the park where his mother had taken him in his stroller, and met people who had searched for him for years. 30 years after the disappearance that changed so many lives, Sarah watched from the window as Michael taught Jamie how to repair an old car engine in the yard of the house he had finally reclaimed in Pine Creek, not as a reunited couple, the wounds were too deep for that, but as two adults who had found fragile peace for the sake of the son they had almost lost forever. A silent reminder that some absences can be filled, even when the scars remain.